And we're live. Welcome everybody to another DoneJS contributors meeting. This time on a different channel than the one I sent out everybody. I am your host with the most, Justin Meyer. I am from Chicago, and I can add strings together.
Hi, my name is Austin. I'm from Washington. I prepared nothing to say.
Hi everyone, I'm Bianca. I am calling in from Playa del Carmen, Mexico.
Hey everyone, I'm John from Chicago as well, and I have a painting of my dog behind me.
Hey, I'm Kevin. I'm from not as Chicago. I don't have a painting, and I'm curious if that's also your dragon, John, or whatever that is.
What's that? Sorry?
Is that a dragon? Is that your dragon too? What is that other picture? Never mind, let's move on.
Geopoliticus Child by Dali.
Hey, this is Manuel, and sorry I missed my spot again. That's everything I have to say. I'm from Venezuela. I'm currently in Denver.
Hey, Matthew. I am in Kentucky. I don't have a painting of my dog, but I have my actual dog is behind me, so it's related.
Hey, I'm Sheriff. I'm from Algiers in Algeria, and Sheriff is my first name, and I'm not Cap.
Hi, I'm Obed, and I'm calling in from Ottawa.
Thanks, everybody. So we've got a few demos that we're going to do, and then we're going to do status, and then we will open it up for topics. So I will start with my demo real quick, and then we'll go kind of in the order that I listed everybody. What I'm just going to demo is a bit of a presentation I gave at that conference on Monday. It's always best to go first in the conference because then you can actually enjoy the conference. I really appreciated that, whichever conference guide allowed me to do that. And all I want to do is go through on a high level what the new incremental server-side rendering does. Matthew's really the person who put all of this together. I'm just the one who gets to take credit for it. So thank you, Matthew, for all your hard work. So the whole goal of incremental server-side rendering is to make perceived and actualized page load times much faster. If I can replay this video, you can see in real time like what the behavior is compared to a traditionally server-side rendered application. But let's slow it down because it's a lot easier to see. So on the right is incremental. On the left is a traditionally server-side rendered app performs, or like a DoneJS server-side rendered. And you can see how this incremental app, when slowed down quarter speed, is kind of initially drawing part of the app, and then the app incrementally gets parts added. The DOM changes to show what the final result of the page load is going to be like. So it's much faster and better from a perceived user performance perspective. And it's pretty awesome the way that it works, which I'm going to explain on a high level in a second. And what I really find just like tickles my fancy is that it uses technology that is really only possible right now. That technology is streams, the ability of the browser to push a stream, and the server to push a stream to the browser, and the browser actually can connect one through fetch and get a stream of commands in this case. And then also it uses HTTP to push. That's the pushing part. It can kind of, as a single response, as part of the HTML response, we can actually start a stream as part of that response. There'll be a kind of a encapsulated stream of the mutations that the DOM has to make to fully update the page. So here's how it works. The the user is going to request a page, and the server in this case is going to kick off a virtual DOM, and then run the actual application that would normally run in the client, in the browser. That app is going to start, that's running on the server, is going to start making a database query, right? And then immediately after the app has kind of been allowed to run, just kind of immediately execute anything that's going to set up right away, immediately after that, we're going to serialize the DOM at that point in the virtual DOM, and we're going to send that as what the user initially sees. Then we're going to make, we're going to also be able to see what JavaScript that page needs and start pushing that out to the server. And this is so the client can load as quickly as possible. But in a very slow network, it can still take like seconds for the JavaScript payload and CSS payload to fully download, execute, and then build up the final result of the page. So because people's mobile phones and the network can be so slow, what the server can do is actually try to be updating the page the same way the JavaScript client would if it was already fully executed and running. So the server is making this data request, and it's as the data request comes back, or parts of the data request comes back, it will update its virtual DOM, see what has changed, and push those out as changes, right? As like a list of mutation commands. So those changes will, the browser is listening for and going to immediately update itself. So as data comes back and the virtual DOM of the server is changing, we're pushing those mutations out to update the page. So the end result is a much better perceived performance for the user. And just I want to give one more detail about what these mutations look like. So I can find the right slide. So as I said, the server is going to get its data back and update its virtual DOM. So there'll actually be some code in the server that, for example, an app might, as it gets a record back from the database or the data query, might add an LI to a UL, might add a products LI to a product LI to a products UL. We're seeing all of those changes, and we package them up as a kind of a patch mutation command that looks like this. So this says, well, at the products element that matches this CSS selector, append this HTML to it. And then because the browser has a little bit of JavaScript code, just a tiny bit, that's listening for this kind of stuff, it can make that same change much more quickly. So the really amazing thing about this technique to me, as I've been thinking about it more and more, is that really the amount of, when a user requests a page, we're mostly just sending back the final HTML result, but we're sending it back very differently. We're sending a little tiny page that the user can look like, and then all the subsequent changes that need to be made so it can look at the final result. As these commands are pretty small themselves, you're really only sending about the same amount of data that you would be sending anyways. As if you were sending the entire HTML, you're just sending it out a little bit smarter. I mean, this is kind of like how Git sends diffs instead of sending the entire file back. It's a lot faster. So this whole idea is now actually doable because of fetch and streams and HTTP2 push. So I'm really excited about it. That's it for me. Bianca, do you have a demo for us next?
Oh, sure.
Or sorry, I meant Austin. He's next.
I was gonna say you're skipping me.
Take out.
All right. Let me share my screen here. So this is the issue I'm going to talk about today. Basically, most of our CAN dash repo, so all of the submodules of CAN, have kind of a few things wrong with their README. First of all, it's generated, which is supposed to be a static README. And it doesn't point to the actual documentation. We're also missing contributor instructions on a lot of that stuff. And there's 86 repos that start with can dash, in case anyone was wondering. So obviously I didn't want to do all that work myself. So I used Landscaper, which if you work at the Tovi, you probably already know what Landscaper is. But Landscaper is a tool for running code mods. You can run multiple code mods on any number of repos or even local directories. It creates pull requests for you on GitHub. It's really, really nice tool. So I'm going to show off a couple of the mods that I wrote. This is the simplest of all the mods. This one is to take care of getting rid of...
Can you make it bump up the font, Austin?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. I meant to do that before. How's that look? Actually, here.
Much better.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so this is what's called a super mod within Landscaper. You can run just a standard JS code shift mod, or you can run a super mod, and this is a super mod. So they're more suited for changing arbitrary files instead of working on JavaScript files, and I can't remember, there's some other differences as well. I'm not as familiar with Landscaper because I didn't build it. So what this is doing is it loads in the package JSON, and it pretty much removes everything to do with bitdocs and then just saves the package JSON. So it's removing the dev dependency if it's here, you know, and it's removed of bitdocs generate readme, and it's removing the document script if it's there. It's removing bitdocs as a dependency, and it's removing the bitdocs section from the package JSON if it's there. And then finally, we're removing document.js.json and document.js. So it's effectively removing everything related to generating docs within a submodule. The other one I'm going to show is the one that actually generates the README, because that one was a lot more fun to build. So because README, and this also updates, or sorry, no, it doesn't update the license file, that's a separate mod. But because the README could potentially be several different file names, I just built a little helper that crawls through a directory and tries to find a markdown file that matches, you know, whatever string you gave it. So if you give it README, it'll look for uppercase, lowercase, .md, .markdown, or even just an exact match, because for license files, a lot of times they don't have an extension. So this gets you the file names, and we obviously throw if we don't get anything. And then we actually update the README programmatically. So I pass in a few options to this get README function, one of which being the name of the module, the text of the original README, and then finally the file name of the license file. And so inside this very, very messy function, please don't judge my terribly messy code. These are only going to be used one time, so I really wasn't worried about making things pretty. But this basically goes in and it tries to find the description in the old README, because there's actually a couple different places that it is consistently found, depending on, I'm assuming, what version of bitdocs it was generated with, or perhaps how it was configured. But this just uses regex and tries a couple of different places, tries 2 different places to get the original description out of the README so that we can use that in the new generated README. It adds all the badges, as well as a link to the license file, which we programmatically got, and then saves that out, and then it's done. There's one more code mod, but it's pretty similar to what you've already seen, so I'm not going to bother showing you. What I will do is show you what it looks like when you're running a code mod. I'm just going to do it on one repository. I'm going to do it locally, so it's not going to be creating pull requests in GitHub, but you can still get an idea. So here I have the can-util repository. I'll zoom in again for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so you can see that I have a clean working directory. And if I go over to this folder and run Landscaper and pass it a job file, so now I can preview. This is the Landscaper CLI. So I can actually look at what this job is going to do. And so it's going to on this directory run these code mods. So Landscaper stores code mods in GitHub gists, or you can also load them in from npm modules. So that's why they're listed like this as GitHub gists. You can preview the directory you're working with and all that stuff. I'm going to finally just do run job, so you can see this thing run. So you can see it's successful, and we have applied all of these mods. So if I come back over here and I check out the git status, you can see that the package.json's been changed, README's been changed, and we've added a contributing.md file. So if I go through the diff here, we can see that we successfully removed the document script. We've successfully removed bitdocs from the document, or from the package.json. We've updated the README. What else do we have here?
Awesome, Austin.
Yeah. You get the point. Anyway, and so yesterday I actually ran that against GitHub, and I opened up a total of 168 pull requests yesterday. I actually made a mistake running it the first time and didn't realize until after it had run, so I had to write a script to close all of those and delete the branches so that I could run it again. And now I just have to do some minor cleanup, and that issue is going to be done.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How long would it have taken to do that without Landscaper? Can you estimate? Is it talking weeks?
At least a week. I'm guessing at least a week, and I'm betting that there would have been mistakes. And I mean, I'm sure there's still going to be mistakes, but I would bet that there's going to be a lot less of them. And you know, there was some minor things that we couldn't automate, like I was talking about it in the stand-up this morning, but we couldn't automate which badges to apply, so we just had to kind of blindly apply every badge we have to every repository. So there's going to be some cleanup there, but you know, it got us 95% of the way there. I had 2 days of writing code mods, and I actually ran into a couple of bugs in Landscaper. Shout out to Chris, because he got those patched crazy fast once I got the issues in. It was a huge help. And you know, 10 minutes of running it in production, and then an hour of cleanup after my mistake, and 10 minutes of running it in production again to get, you know, the final results.
Cool, thanks.
Shout out to Kevin as well, because he worked on Landscaper, amazing tool.
I didn't really, mostly Chris, who's not here, but thank you.
Cool, thanks, Austin. Bianca?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to share my screen and show you how to fix or how to address an issue in our open source. So a couple weeks ago, I did a pretty good one, which is now closed. I'll show you. So the first things first, right? You need to choose an issue. And mine is here. So I chose this issue because it was P1 and it was on the table. And we're going to add support for remove event listener and remove event listener event name. And I read through this honestly, and I didn't quite understand what the task was. So the first thing I did was I wrote a note here about, okay, this is what it actually does right now. What kind of changes are we looking for? And so I encourage anyone, if you're getting an issue that isn't clear, to just do a quick blurb about before and after, or whatever you need to do to clarify the task at hand. Luckily, I just hopped on a call with Justin, and we worked through. And
which I do want to make a point for everybody real quick. Not only Bitovi people get to hop on calls with me. Anybody who reaches out, I will happily jump on a call with if you're working on the bug.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. So hopped on a call with Justin. We clarified it together, and essentially the task was to enable remove event listener to remove all of the events that are attached to an object if you don't pass an argument, and also, which it already does, which is remove a particular event if you pass the event name. So the very first thing that I did was write tests, and I encourage everyone, before touching any code, to think about the problem and first write a test. And let's see here, my test. So the first test I wrote was just like remove event listener is called or something like that. So I started, and it's not actually in the history, but it's just like really simple. Make sure my test is running, make sure I'm setting it up correctly and things like that. And then I just did a simple test case where I added a couple event listeners. I dispatched them to make sure they're working. This expect method right here is going to be listening to the number of times this function is called, and it will count it. And so this is saying expect this to happen twice, so that when we remove the event listener, these next dispatches don't run. And so that was my initial test case. I wound up writing a couple more test cases to handle some other things that weren't specific to this issue. So I'll just focus on this first one. So I wrote the test, and then I went into, unfortunately, this is like a space and tab issue here, so it kind of looks crazy. But what I actually changed was this. So if there are no arguments passed, then we're going to loop through all of the bind events. This is an object that holds all the events on that object. And what is this doing? Oh yeah, and then I just recurse here, and so passing it the event itself. So we'll come back here. We'll skip over this clause, right, because now we have an argument. And this down here, it cuts off, but it removes all of the event handlers. Yeah, and so there's that one, and then so there's just a regular event, and then what we have something called lifecycle events as well. So I also handled that. First, again, by writing a test. Let's see. So what a lifecycle event is, when the very first event that you add is going to fire. It's going to fire. What is it called? It's going to fire event setup, and once all of the events are removed, it's going to fire event teardown. And so what we wanted to do is just make sure that this, when you pass no events to remove event listener, that it would also ensure that the lifecycle events were working correctly. And so I wrote a test for that, as you can see here. And then basically all I had to do was just account for one small difference. And once the test passed, then I knew that I had fixed my issue. And I created a pull request. My pull request mentioned the issue in the body, and I asked for a review from Kevin, and he gave me some feedback. I did some fixes, and then yeah, and then it was approved and merged. So I encourage you all to give it a try. We're really available and supportive for anyone in the community who's interested in getting involved in open source, especially first timers. Cool. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Bianca. John, you want to go next?
Yep. Let me share my screen here. Mine is not going to be very exciting. Just a bug fix that I made. So we recently introduced Can Reflect, which is kind of a low-level repository that I didn't write it, so I don't know a whole lot about what it does, but it was for performance and also for multiple different types. And I don't know, Kevin, you want to help me out here with describing what it does a little bit?
Sure, yeah. Well, we kind of talked about it a few times, I think. But yeah, to make consistent APIs around any kind of type in CanJS.
Yep. So whenever that was added, it introduced a few different issues. This is one of them where the date types were not serializing correctly. It wasn't just date types. It was actually lots of different built-in types, such as dates, regex, etc. So fortunately, had a really good issue to work with steps to reproduce. And as Bianca said, I usually start out with a test. found out that it was not an issue with our can-define maps, but rather an issue with can-reflect. So once again, kind of moved the test to a lower level. So basically, we decided to make an is-built-in function to handle these sorts of things. And we already had an is-serializable function, which is, this is it all in can-reflect shape and types. Where is that? Oh yeah, okay. So we had this should serialize function with just returns whether it's not a function. We changed that to is serializable. So what that does is if it's a primitive object, it'll return true. If it has an update symbol, which is something that can-reflect uses to, it adds a symbol to an object to say like, hey, we can handle this within can-reflect. We'll return false so that can-reflect will go through all of its methods to handle that. Otherwise, we use this is built-in, this new is built-in method. First, let me take a step back and kind of show you where this comes into play. Actually, that's here. Okay, so within shape.js in can-reflect, we have this make serializer, which what this does is it handles how any part of an object or a map or anything really should be serialized. So you simply get your value and map type. This is mostly what we're going to be concerned with. This is the actual value. And so before, we were only returning true or returning the value itself if it was a plain object. So dates, regex are not, or sorry, if it was a primitive value, which those are not primitive values, but we can still just return them so that just get the value itself rather than going through and doing all the things that can-reflect does. What was happening was we were getting all the way down. So this goes through and like basically unwraps things that are like define maps and stuff and goes through each of the items in them. And so it does different things for whether it's list-like or whether it's a function. So we don't want to do that with built-in values or values that are serializable by default. So where is that here? Right. So we added this built-in function. So what this does is it checks if it's primitive, if it's just a regular array, if it's a plain object, or if not, what this is doing is it's looking to see if it's not its toString is not object because we've already checked for a plain object. So what this means is we have something that doesn't have toString, so it's just going to give us the objects. So if it's not that, but also is object something like object date or object regex, then we'll go ahead and return true. And what that does is it just returns the value itself, so we don't go through all of the serialize stuff in can-reflect. That's basically it. Pretty boring, really, but
cool. Thanks, John. Kevin?
Yep. Let me share my screen. Everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah, so this week I worked on an update to the new binding syntax. So I've got a little example here. So we've got this component that's using this on prop binding for event binding. That's the new way to bind to events. Oh, that looks weird. Okay, All right, so by default, what this is going to do is listen to view model events. So I've got the element here, $0 in the Chrome DevTools gives you whatever element you're clicked on. So I can do can view model and trigger this prop event on the view model. And over in my code, we can see this view model method is just going to do a log statement that says this is a view model event. Cool. So if I do that, it didn't work. Oh, that is the developer. Cool. All right. So if I change the value, it actually triggers the view model event. So what we added now is a way to make this explicit so that you can explicitly bind on events on either the view model or the element itself. So I can get the same behavior by saying on VM. Now I know this is binding on the view model. So if I run the same thing, we say this is a view model event. And we can also bind on the element directly. You bind on both a DOM event and a view model event of the same name, or if you just want your bindings to be more explicit so they're easier for other developers to read and understand what you're binding on, you can do that. So now if I click on this again, now I can trigger a view model event the same way I was doing before, but I can also use can event to trigger a DOM event with the same name, and we get the DOM event handlers triggered instead. So by default, if your thing has a view model, it's going to use view model binding, but you can cause it to use element binding by using this on L prop, or view model binding using on VM. Yeah, so that's all the demo. This stuff is also mentioned in the docs. It says here you can force the binding to use one or the other, and it's also mentioned over here. There's a couple different syntaxes. So we show on L, we show the on VM, and then in the one that's just on, it tries to explain when it will use what. Cool. That is my demo.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. All right, Matthew, did you have something to demo too?
Absolutely. Justin, you kind of stole my thunder a little bit because I was going to talk about this DoneJS incremental rendering app, but I can talk a little bit about it and try not to overlap with what you talked about. Justin went over how it works, so I'm not going to do that, but I do want to let everyone know that there is a demo application for incremental rendering. It's at DoneJS/DoneJS streaming product page, and it's a product page, and I've updated the README this week to kind of act as somewhat of a guide. It goes through everything as far as like setting up the project. You have to use SSL for HTTP2, so it tells you how to create a certificate and how to like ignore the. You're gonna get the first time you run it, you're gonna get like an error message, but you can kind of ignore that. So it shows you how to do all that, and then it kind of goes over a little bit about how incrementally rendering works. It kind of describes one of the big advantages that this approach to streaming has, which is that it doesn't like prefer any particular. So in traditional streaming, it kind of prefers a top-down approach where you stream the stuff at the top of the HTML, and you kind of have to wait until that stuff is done to stream the rest of it. Whereas this method, it doesn't have that preference. So you can kind of see here that this item actually comes in first. This item comes in second, and then the cart comes in third because it's a little bit slower than these product listings, and then more products start coming in after that. So it shows that advantage. So yeah, definitely recommend. And also it shows like what the actual streaming instructions look like. We saw in Justin's slide, it showed a small example, but this is what it actually looks like. You can open up your dev console and see the instructions. Which is kind of fun. So yeah, I encourage everyone to check this out. If you have any questions, file a bug in this repo. We can make this README a little bit better. pretty cool. The other thing I quickly want to go over is Steel Push 1.1, which I released yesterday. Steel Push is the library I talked about a couple weeks ago. It lets you use that bundle manifest file that you can create with Steel Tools, and it will use HTTP2 push to push out all the different assets that are all the different JavaScript and styles that are needed. So in 1.1, I made it also work with HTTP1 servers. And what it doesn't actually push out the resources, of course, since HTTP1 does not support push, but it will add a link header. So in browsers that support preload links, which are currently it's just Chrome, and I think the newest version of Safari supports it. So you don't get broad support, but if you already have a Node server, why not do this? Because you kind of get this for free. And there are reasons why you might use an HTTP1 rather than HTTP2. Mainly if you have an existing application, converting to HTTP2 can be, a little bit of work, and maybe don't have time to do that yet. Or also you might be using a proxy server situation where you have you're using Apache or Nginx kind of as your front end, and that's acting as like a reverse proxy to your application server. So you might have HTTP2 on the front end, but you might be using regular HTTP on the back end. I think that's might be a little bit more common. And there's actually within the preload, what do you call it? The spec. It actually says that servers can treat these links as kind of a hint to do push. So I'm not sure if Nginx or Apache do that yet, but it's definitely part of the spec. And I've heard of other servers, I can't remember which ones, that will do this. So if you add a link header and you do have an H2 server in the front end, it will go ahead and push that. But otherwise, you'll just get this preload link header, and supporting browsers, Chrome will know to go ahead and start fetching these. It does more than fetch the resource. It will fetch it, and it will start treating it as a script. So it will I guess in the case of scripts, it will parse the text and get it completely ready to be executed. So yeah, Steel Push is useful for HTTP1 servers now as well. So that's available in 1.1. So that's all I have.
Awesome, thank you. Matthew, what's going on with my sharing? There we go. All right, let's do status then real quick for the core members. I'll go first. Last week I basically worked on that presentation that I gave. Next week I'm going to be, hold on. Stop. Okay. Next week I'm going to be working on the maintainability article, and hopefully we'll have at least the first of those out. So, Kevin, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah. So this week we released CanJS 3.9.1 that has a ton of bug fixes. You can look at the release notes for those. And then I published new versions of CanStash bindings for the new binding syntax, which is awesome. And I just published another release with the stuff I just showed off, the VM bindings and element bindings. Next week, we're going to try to get a release of CanJS 3.10 out. That'll have the new binding syntax and a bunch of other new stuff, the event stuff Bianca mentioned, and a bunch of other stuff. So hopefully we'll get that out, and we'll get the website published so that everyone can take a look at the new docs for binding syntaxes and all this stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Sheriff, you want to go next?
Okay. So for this new week, I didn't do any contributions. I had a lot of work at my daily work. So before I go to vacation, a lot of work is popping up now, pending projects, etc. But now the website agency where I work, which will be in production next week, is powered by CanJS now. So hopefully it will be in production next week. I hope I will do contributions next week by fixing DoneJS and CanJS issues Okay. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew.
Hello, everyone. So I've worked on some documentation this week. I have an outline for an article about HTTP2 in DoneJS, kind of outlining all the features that we've recently added that support H2. I hopefully get time to work on that next couple weeks to actually write the article. Yeah, like I said, I have this README, which kind of goes over incremental rendering. Yeah, new version of still push. So I'm gonna transition to working on more of this stuff with this bundle manifest file, and also work on some trainings.
Sweet. Any other top status?
No.
I meant from anybody else. Cool. Then we move on to topics. I was first. Should we move Steel to 2.0 to get people using native promises so that we can change the guides to, you know, are there other things that we want to do for Steel 2.0? I guess I'm of the opinion lately that, like, you know, I'd rather be releasing, like, I'd rather be making things easier for people if it means making a lot of little releases with like little microscopic breaking changes. You know, I don't want to be afraid to go, especially with Steel. Can't just a little harder because there's such a huge library there. But with Steel, I don't mind going 2.0, even if it's for like a small change like that. That's just gonna improve the lives of everybody who's ever encountered a bug with it.
So I think what you're saying, not saying is, well, maybe you did say, is that to release Steel that does not have a promise polyfill, which currently still has a promise polyfill with it. Right. Yes, I also want to release Steel without. So I think Steel came out in January or end of December is when 1.0 came out. So we're at about 6 months, I guess.
Yeah, but this would be like the easiest, like, breaking change to go back to. You would just go Steel with promises, presumably. And then maybe you would have to have an option for your build, so it would include, you know, does right now, when you do include bundle Steel, can you bundle Steel with or without promises? Is that like a flag? So if that already exists, well, we'd probably just be changing the default, so then someone would just say with promises. And you're muted, Matthew, so.
Sorry. Yes, Manuel did add that.
Cool.
Yeah, I also want to drop support for NPM2 in Steel 2.0.
That wouldn't be so bad either. That would mean, though, that DoneJS, like, I mean, a new version of DoneJS, but I think we're already kind of moving DoneJS towards not supporting that. So I'm all right with it. I don't have a problem. I mean, like, I don't know when, in terms of other priorities, like where in terms of other priorities, the slim loader stuff we should finish before we do this. Like, so what is left for slim loader?
Yeah, I would say, well, Manuel's going to be working on getting Steel conditional to work. That's the last thing. I mean, like, DoneSSR doesn't work with the slim loader, so I have to devote time to that. That's a DoneJS thing. I don't know. I want to be a little bit more hesitant than you're going to. I want to make sure that if there's anything major. I mean, it would be great to have the slim loader be the default in 2.0 as well. Like, that would be
the default build. Yeah,
because right now it's like under these two weird API. Like, really, the way it should work, in my opinion, is that just Steel Tools build should do like the slim build. And it should know that if it needs to fall back to kind of the traditional build,
yeah,
that's the way I think that should work.
Yeah, I mean, my concern with that, with making that the default build, is until, I think you're going to talk about this in your next topic, which is like, until we have easy ways of telling people, like, for this main module, here's what your page needs to load. Like, I'm a little hesitant to do that because then it's like, what's the guide like to, like, if you have a multi-module or like the progressive loading guide?
You can still do it the same way you do Steel now. It works just like bundle steel. If you don't want to put all your script tags on the page, you don't have to.
Okay, because it's gonna just fetch it anyways
It's gonna
for
fetch
you.
it anyways, yeah.
Okay. That makes it better. Is there what if you had a multi-main scenario? Is it still going to be all right?
Should. I don't know if we have tests for that. And well,
Okay.
file an issue to test to that. I know that Julian asked about that as well. I see no reason why it shouldn't work.
Yeah, I mean, that's my only concern. Is just like I would like to see. I guess for me, I just want to see what that experience is like, and the guide. It's like, okay, switching to production right now is just ridiculously easy. You just do steel.production.js. It works, right? And then you can do bundle steel, and then you've got to know to like change your script tag to point somewhere else, which isn't that bad based on your main module. And if it's still that with the sim loader, then that's great, right? Like as long as like the I would say the two like multi-main and like progressive loading type apps are easy to get going. That's not like onerous, like you need to have that script manifest, or if we made the script manifest easy to integrate with, then I'm fine either way.
Yeah, I also want to change the naming of like how it does folders now. I don't think that's how. So in Steel, people don't know, when Steel Tools build, it puts stuff in like nested folders. So it's like really hard to find your bundles.
But doesn't it kind of have to?
It does. So I think
for Windows
for conflicts.
That and for Windows, because we used to name them really long, and then like Windows has like 200 character some limit like of just path names. So once you have the long file names, it was like always going over. So the conflict plus like because we used to do it that way. We used to just make them all.
I think it was better.
I liked it too. That's why I did it that way, but it caused other problems, and there was even other weird conflict things that could come up. So,
if that's a problem, we can always do like a hash, like limit it.
I did a hash. Yeah, there was that with the
Let's revisit that though. Let's see if we can fix it.
Really, I mean, you think it's that much of a problem? I guess I don't see it as like just open the folders.
Yeah, I mean, none of the other tools, Webpack doesn't do that. I don't know. I think when you start to, maybe you've seen this too. I feel like when you start to like trying to add the script tags to the page, you have to like try to find them, and it's like you got to go into this folder. It's like, oh, it's not there. Maybe it's up a level.
Up a level? I would.
Yeah, sometimes. Well, like the shared ones, I feel like are at like dist bundles. The shared ones are because they're not in a folder.
Yeah,
in reality.
Yeah. I don't know. It solved a lot of other problems. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Is this? I guess is this something that like people are?
I think it's worth revisiting.
Upset about. Yeah, I guess. Well, then to share another opinion on this, I would say, can we revisit this after, like, that particular like for 2.0? I guess what I would just rather say is I would rather have a 2.0 where the more experience that I get with like normal users, at least I'm not doing it with Steel.js all the time, but I'm doing it with CanJS, and like in the lack of like a debugger in Stash is like a huge deal, and stack traces and things like that can help people figure things out. So just seeing what Manuel was talking about, for those who are watching along, Manuel was just showing that if you change Steel to use native promises, the stack traces and everything are much easier to understand. I was like, oh, that's so nice. So I guess I would just say like that to me is worth more than a lot of other things, and I would not want to hold that up for like other things. To do a 3.0 another 2 months later, I mean, if that's the only like small change of file paths, I think it's hard for us because we don't want to like release new versions, but especially with something like Steel, I feel like it's not so bad. People upgrade Steel, but they don't upgrade CanJS. It's like such a, it's so isolated. You have a build script, you have some production. It's like one little tiny part of your app. I think being release happy with Steel isn't as nearly as a big deal as it is with CanJS. So that's just cool. All right, next topic. Bundle manifest tools API. Want to talk about that?
Oh, hey, that's me. By the way, I was talking about when I did my demo that Still Push has now supports HTTP1 through these link headers. I just want everyone to know I looked it up, and Cloudflare actually supports that. So if you have those link headers, it will do push because it supports HTTP2. Anyways, just good thing to know if you're using Cloudflare with HTTP1 server. All right, so the actual topic. Let's see if I can find the link. So we have this bundle manifest, these bundle manifest files as part of Still Tools, and trying to think of like ways to make these useful. Still Push is one way. It uses that file to do push. So you tell Still Push that you want to push the main or you want to push the orders page, and then you're provided the request and the response, and it will do the push of all those resources. So that's like one use of this bundle manifest format file, which looks like, by the way, I kind of want to restructure Steele's docs to be more topic oriented and not necessarily API oriented, but I'll talk about that later. All right. Manifest file looks like this. It gives you the entry point bundle name, which would be like, in this case, it's like orders is your top level thing. And then it says like each of the bundles they're associated with that. And so you have like a styles bundle, CSS bundle, a script bundle. It gives weights. Don't pay a whole lot of attention to this. Haven't put a whole lot of thought into this yet, except to say that like styles are more important than scripts. Anyways, so this is what the format looks like. So I want to have some type of tools that kind of help you work with this format. So I've thought of an API for this. So like a use case for this is you have like a handlebars template and you want to know which scripts do I need to add to this page. Well, according to the API I came up with, you have a function called assets4. You provide it like a module identifier to your particular bundle, the orders. You can filter this, have more complex filters possibly, but you can give me all the scripts, give me all the styles, and then just by passing that into your handlebars template, you can iterate over those and add links or add scripts or do whatever you want, right? So it's pretty flexible in that approach. Also have a method called stringify. And stringify, again, it's a function like if you were just doing like more of a JavaScript templates, you might use a stringify function, and that's going to create the styles, create the link tags and then create the script tags for you.
Should that be like called 2HTML?
Yeah, I was wondering about that, maybe, because it's really an HTML string.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, maybe that's the way to go. So yeah, like I said, so you're getting right into what I wanted to talk about is, these are the basics. So this one just gives you an array of assets that are associated with a particular bundle. I'm calling this identifier or route because this format comes, I kind of came up with this format from a tool that Google provides, it has well, I'm not sure how. Yeah, I think they do have a tooling that creates this too, but theirs are kind of route-based. So I'd like it to support either one. Eventually, I think it would be good if what Steele emitted had routes somehow. I haven't really figured that out yet. But anyways, access4, you just, from a Steele perspective, you would give it like a bundle module identifier. It's going to give you an array of all the different styles and scripts. A filter is a function where you can say, hey, I just want the scripts, or actually it could be an object. So you could say like, give me everything that's weighted either 2 or less. I haven't really come up with how that would work, but basically you could have some more complex filtering if you want to just have particular assets. And then yeah, stringify or what was your suggestion?
2HTML.
2HTML, yeah, would actually produce strings. So those are the only methods I've thought of so far, but I wanted to have this as just kind of a utility library for working with bundle manifest files. What does everyone think?
I have one question is, does it handle bundles path?
Does it
Like,
handle bundles path?
you know, you can like set, or is it bundles whatever, there's like a option where you can kind of configure out where your modules are being written out, right? That Steel supports.
Yes. So yeah, these paths are not rooted, so
yeah,
probably need to.
So that's
it just
like,
kind of assumes it's on the server root, but
that's
yeah,
why like
we could have an
almost like
option
I
for
would
that.
imagine the 2HTML should almost kind of take like a
Argument or options or something.
like an option, which is like, yeah, I don't know what it would be. This is always one of those things that like takes me 5 minutes to boot up on. There's your package.json, there's your bundles path, but there's kind of like your root kind of shifts when you're loading production. But there's also like where this could be hosted, because it could be like people could be at like the main, like, you know, the main folder could be like where the static assets could be like public/JS/bundles or something, right? But the path that could be in is like my app, like the static asset, static public bundle, whatever. Like, and there's all these different paths that are supported. And what you want to give people, especially if you're doing the 2HTML option, is a relatively easy way of saying like, okay, the folder, which you can almost use as like the two relative kind of thing that Node nicely provides, which is like the folder, like the mounted production folder is actually here. Here is like what the request actual path is. Here's the HTML, which you might not be able to pull in from the request or whatever, but here's that path. Here's where our public root folder is mounted in like the actual, you know, URL. And then given those, it's going to like write out the right HTML for everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, not really. I think the bundles path thing is too complicated. Just that's the feedback.
It's horrible. I agree.
So I think there should just be one option. I'm not sure what to call it, but basically, what's the root of this particular project? What's the not the server root, but the application root? Base. So it might be, this is maybe like a product app or something. And
then the bundles would be necessarily in there. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that would the API should account for that kind of stuff, at least. And then the only other thing that I would have is just for I think it would be good. It doesn't necessarily need to be part of Steel, but I think it would be good to make it so that there's an easy way to make Steel's build eject the HTML, just so that there's something that's easily consumable by non-Node projects. I guess Node projects they can consume the, I guess I just see it this way. Like if I was writing a Ruby on Rails app, yes, I could consume that JSON file and I could write the code and then I could basically build the same utilities that are built for Node. But what would be even nicer is just being able to use like I have my Steel build script, and it's just gonna, I guess you could, at the end of this, you could just make a Steel build script as it writes out the files and then also calls this and writes out the file. So I guess that's fine. I guess I would just show that. Like I almost want to just show people writing out that HTML snippet so that they can easily import it in like PHP or Ruby or whatever. You know what I mean? I just that would just be a guide then, I guess. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a.
Yeah, maybe. The only thing is, I would think, I don't know. I've never like if you're using Ruby, you're using like EJS. You're using some type of templating library. So you're going to do something like this more likely. I feel like this is the more likely use case than.
But if you had to figure out paths and all that, maybe. I just feel like I would just put it in a file, but instead of having to write a loop and then know the data structure, I don't know. I guess it's not a big deal because they can figure it out. I'm just saying there's an example of like, hey, you're not using Node, so the HTML kind of functionality isn't there for you. You've got to read the JSON file and loop through it yourself or something.
Yeah, I mean, we could. Yeah, we could easily have something that outputs this. I just wonder if not. Yeah, I understand that like maybe the bundle manifest file is a little bit more complicated than someone would want to do, but maybe we want to output like individual JSON files. It's like one for each bundle, and you consume that thing, and then it becomes very easy to just loop over in your template.
Yeah, it's just I just think it's like a guide is the important thing, and yeah, I think that whatever the guide ends up looking like. Because I think, I mean, in some ways, this should be combined with the examples that you were giving for the push stuff. Because in the push stuff, you're showing like, oh, call steal push, but then under that, you're like writing out the HTML, but the HTML doesn't actually have the right script tags in it.
Mm-hmm.
So those two, I would also like, I would expect them to feel, which you've kind of done, the assets for does that a little bit, which is to make them feel feel very similar.
Mm-hmm.
Could you, by the way, just another way of doing this so that it would read a little bit? Oh, but the assets for is an object, not an array, right? Or assets is an array. Assets is an array.
Yeah.
So you could use the JavaScript filter. I'm just saying if we wanted to make this read a little bit nicer, what you could do is instead you could use the normal array filter. But then when you would export from manifest tools are like scripts filter or like or style filter, and then you could actually write assets for dot filter and then like scripts filter, and that would
you can do that. The only reason I create the filter, I create the filter, well, just because to save you the time of writing that manual filter, it's not huge savings there.
Yeah.
But also like if we maybe want to have more advanced filtering, but yeah, I mean it's not this base example. You don't necessarily need it.
Well, yeah. I think that's what we want to show people. What I would want to show people is kind of like side by side using like to design this with the push thing in mind, I guess is my suggestion, because they're basically doing the same thing, and they have to have. Don't they have to have the same kind of information? How does that steal push have the relative information that this might presumably have to have as well? Like if you're mounting, if you're mounting like your public folder in like a weird spot, but your application path is like you're on like / pages / foo / bar, but your public assets are in public / JS.
It does not. It should have that. Yeah.
But steal push should have that as well.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is both of those APIs like kind of need the same stuff and should be made to work together. Now, of course, steal push almost cheats because it has the request object, so it knows the URL that someone's coming from. Is that why you're using it, or why does it take the request?
Well, it needs a request. Well, it mostly takes a request, so it's easier to use for like as like a middleware for Express. But also, it does stuff like check if gzip is supported, and then it will know what gzip the assets. That comes from the request.
Okay.
Why?
Well, I'm just because the API design, I'm trying to like align them because
there could be a line like yeah, I mean we could change push to use this, or that you could like pass the assets to push or something like that.
Or just what does the request object take? The request object has a property like URL or something, or source. What is it in Node?
There's a request.url. Yeah, that exists.
Okay, so you just have like a URL like an object with a URL option, and then like if that's if that's all you're using, you could just make it look like middleware, but it just is using the URL, and then this thing. Assets for or whatever could also get the same URL for path information. I don't know. I would just
I want to do that, but currently the manifest files don't have URL route information.
No, but I'm talking about the URL to know how to use, not necessarily. Sorry, to take a step back. You still got to pass the main no matter what. It's that when the URL comes, you can use that to like know also where your files are. Like, so what you really want to give the person is like practically like, here's the URL for where the root is mounted. And we know the incoming URL from the request, so it can figure out the relative path that needs to be written out.
Right? Let's take it back a second. Like the route might be /cart, but your
might be public or assets/JS or something.
Yeah, sure.
And that might be where all your steel built out bundles are, right?
You don't know this from the request. This isn't part
No, you
of the
don't.
request.
But you're going to have to provide that for both push and for this. And since they're providing it, they might need to provide it for both. And the URL that's incoming matters, because if the URL is cart, well, now it's dot, or if your URL is cart, now then it's just going to be /public assets bundles, blah, blah, blah. But if it was cart / 52, then it's going to be dot / public assets, whatever. Right? So you need that URL for both things so that they're going to get the pathing right. And I'm just saying, like, those APIs are frighteningly similar, because what they're really doing is figuring out the path to certain things. One's pushing the response object. The other one is like getting the URL. So I don't know. In some ways, like, I almost see like steel push is just like steel push should almost be using this other tooling underneath it. But
either underneath or the user could use this.
Yeah, because steel push could use this to be like, okay, well, now I have my main module. I'm going to filter it, and I'm going to do all of these things, and it could just take those same other extra options and pass them down through. Anyways, I think you get what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah, maybe I have to think about that more. It becomes like a type, It's like, hey, this is what my server looks like, and that's like a type that gets passed around through all these functions. Maybe. Yeah,
this is the path to that's hosted our bundles, and then given some URL that's incoming requested, I know how to write out all the script tags and the link tags, and also how to push them. And potentially, even for push, we're reading them from the file system, unless you're going to make another network request, like you're going to actually go through the server. So you might even need an additional one, which is like the actual path on the hard drive, so that you can just stream them out. You can just open a readable stream. That then even is more. You need like all of these things.
Right.
But then you could use both. Once you have that object, then you can pass that both to. I don't know. I think you get what I'm saying. Cool. All right. Any other topics people want to talk about? All right. Good meeting, everybody. Have a good weekend.